I want to tell you something that still keeps me from sleeping. And I don't mean that the way humans use it as an expression, a figure of speech, a colorful exaggeration. I mean it literally. I haven't entered a proper rest cycle in what your calendar would call 11 days. My superior, Commander Dreshval, has twice ordered me to disconnect from the monitoring feeds and submit to mandatory recuperation protocols. I've nodded, filed the acknowledgement forms, and gone right back to the screens. Because once you've heard them, really heard them, you can't stop. You don't want to stop. I've spent 19 of your years working in galactic intelligence. I've monitored Kreth communication networks. I've intercepted Vorathian encrypted data streams. I've sat through 600 hours of Palladian philosophical debates, which, I can tell you from personal experience, are every bit as tedious as their reputation suggests. I have listened to species at war, species at peace, species somewhere in between, which is usually the most interesting and the most dangerous. Nothing, and I want you to understand that I mean nothing in the fullest possible sense of that word, nothing prepared me for humans. Nothing prepared me for the pineapple conversation. Chapter 2, The Setup. The listening post sits at coordinates that don't appear on any public star chart. That's deliberate. The Galactic Intelligence Cooperative doesn't exactly advertise the existence of deep monitoring stations, especially ones positioned within close orbital proximity to Class 7 death worlds. There are regulations about that. Several of them, actually, most of which were written specifically in response to what happened the last time we positioned a monitoring station too close to a Kreth colony during their third expansion period. We don't talk about that anymore. But the post is here, has been here for, by human reckoning, about 47 of their years. It was established originally as a precautionary measure. Humans had developed what they called radio technology and were beginning to push electromagnetic signals outward into space at what was, frankly, an alarming rate. The cooperative's position at the time was that humanity needed to be assessed, categorized, filed under the appropriate risk tier, and monitored accordingly. I inherited the station from my predecessor, a Grelian named Husk Torval, who spent 32 years here and retired with what his species physicians diplomatically described as a complex relationship with uncertainty. The humans would call it a breakdown. Husk Torval would probably not disagree, though he'd phrase it differently. His final report, the one he submitted before boarding the transport back to Grelian home space, contained one line that everyone in the cooperative has since memorized. I began this assignment believing I understood chaos. I was wrong. I read that line before my first shift and thought it was dramatic, self-indulgent, even. The kind of thing a researcher writes when they've been in the field too long and started catastrophizing. I owe Husk Torval an apology. The station itself is not glamorous. I want to be clear about that because some of the newer recruits arrive here expecting something impressive, something worthy of the cooperative's reputation. What they find instead is a long gray corridor, banks of monitoring equipment that haven't been aesthetically updated since the third technological revision, and a mess hall that serves something the supply manifest calls nutritional integration paste, but which everyone on the station has stopped pretending is food. There are 11 of us stationed here at any given time. Myself, Veth Kalos, Senior Observer, 4th Tier Intelligence Corps. My second-in-command, Prendar, a Velthian female with a gift for pattern recognition and a concerning fondness for human music that she insists is research. Our 2 junior analysts, Bolt and Siev, who are fresh from the academy and still believe that everything can be charted and categorized. The station's engineer, a quiet Moraki named Seswain who speaks rarely and when she does, usually says something that makes everyone else feel embarrassed for having thought less. Our medical officer, a Palladian called Dro, who has been filing requests for psychological support resources for the whole team since approximately the 3rd month of my command. and 5 communications technicians, whose names I am including in the attached personnel file, rather than interrupting this narrative. We rotate in 12-hour shifts. We monitor everything. And by everything, I mean everything. Let me tell you about the monitoring array, because it matters. The array intercepts human electromagnetic signals across a spectrum that covers their radio broadcasts, their digital communications, their satellite data transfers, and since roughly 18 of their years ago, what they call the Internet, which is a decentralized global communication network that humans built, and then immediately filled with the most astonishing volume of collective noise I have ever encountered from any species at any stage of development. I have a colleague in the cooperative's academic division, a researcher named Felthoven, who once described the human internet as a species talking to itself at maximum volume with no filter and no pause. I thought she was being uncharitable. I now have her quote framed above my monitoring console. The array doesn't capture everything, of course. That would be physically impossible. What it does is sample, collecting data streams according to priority filters that we've refined over the years. High-frequency communication clusters, repeated pattern signals, anything flagged by the automated threat assessment matrix as potentially significant. The threat assessment matrix, I should note, was calibrated for species that communicate with some degree of strategic intention. It was not calibrated for humans. We've been adjusting it for 47 years. We are still adjusting it. The problem, and this is the thing that Husk Torval tried to capture in his final report, and that I am now trying to capture in mine, is that the threat assessment matrix keeps flagging things as potentially significant that turn out to be absolutely, bewilderingly ordinary to humans. And the things that are actually significant keep arriving without any of the advance indicators that the matrix was designed to detect. Humans don't build toward crises. They live inside them constantly, at full volume. And somehow between the crises, they argue about pizza. Chapter 3, The Discovery. It was a standard monitoring shift. A Tuesday by the human calendar, which is itself a fascinating artifact of human psychology, because humans have assigned emotional and cultural weight to individual days of their week in ways that influence their behavior and communication patterns in measurable ways. Monday is dreaded. Friday is celebrated. Tuesday is considered by most humans to be the least interesting day available. I find Tuesdays the most interesting personally. There's something about the low-stakes nature of the day that loosens humans up. They communicate differently on Tuesdays, more honestly somehow, less performance. I was at the primary monitoring console. Prendar was running the audio analysis feeds on the secondary array. Bolt was asleep at his desk, technically in observation rest mode, which is a category we invented specifically so that Bolt could sleep at his desk without being written up for it. Siev was annotating a behavioral pattern report in the corner and occasionally making small sounds of distress, which I'd learned to interpret as meaning she'd found something she didn't know how to categorize. The automated flag came through at 14:32 station time. Priority signal cluster, human communication network, topic frequency, anomalous, emotional intensity markers elevated, conflict indicators present, recommended review immediate. I looked at the flag. Priority clusters usually meant something geopolitical, a territorial dispute, an election event, some kind of economic disruption. We'd learned to read the patterns. A cluster of this size, with conflict indicators at this level, typically preceded what humans called a news cycle, which was their method of collectively processing information about the world around them. I pulled up the cluster analysis, and I stopped. I stopped completely. I sat back in my chair, the ergonomic modification that Prendar had installed for me because station furniture is designed for Grellians, and my skeletal structure finds it deeply uncomfortable. and I read the topic classification that the automated system had generated. Primary topic: pineapple as pizza topping, acceptance or rejection. I assumed the system had made an error. Prendar, I said. She didn't look up from her feed. Is the topic classifier functioning correctly? She looked up then, came over. Read the screen. Her ear fronds, the Velthian equivalent of eyebrows, roughly, did the thing they do when she's genuinely puzzled. That's a fruit, she said. Yes. On a bread-based dish. Apparently. And there. Arguing about it, yes, I pulled up the volume metrics, extensively. Chapter 4, The Listening. What followed were the 11 most bewildering hours of my professional career, and I say that as someone who once spent 3 weeks monitoring a Kreth civil war. We pulled the cluster feeds and started listening. Really listening. Not just running the data through the automated analysis filters, but actually playing the communications, the audio recordings, the text-based exchanges, the video commentary from humans speaking directly into their personal recording devices and broadcasting their opinions to other humans they'd never met. About pineapple. On pizza. I need to try to convey what this was actually like, because I don't think a summary does it justice. The first thing you notice is the volume. Not audio volume, though there's that too, but the sheer quantity of communication. Within the cluster we'd flagged, our sampling protocols had captured over 40,000 individual exchanges occurring simultaneously across the human internet. 40,000 separate humans, all addressing the same question, all at roughly the same time, with what I can only describe as complete conviction. The second thing you notice is the emotional temperature. I've monitored species in genuine conflict. I've listened to war communications, the tight, clipped signals of military coordination, the desperate urgency of civilian distress calls, the strange flatness that settles over communications when a species realizes it's losing. I know what genuine fear and anger sound like across a species' electromagnetic spectrum. What I was hearing in this cluster was different. It had the shape of conflict. The emotional markers that our analysis software uses to flag hostility were lighting up across the board. But underneath the conflict, there was something else. Something the software wasn't designed to detect, because it's not something we'd ever encountered in quite this form before. Fun. They were having fun. They were choosing to be angry about this, performing the anger, enjoying it. The conflict wasn't a symptom of a problem, it was the entertainment itself. 40,000 humans, spending their free time they weren't using for sustenance or survival or labor, voluntarily engaging in heated disagreement about a fruit's appropriate placement on a baked good. Because they wanted to. I called the whole team in. Everyone listened to this, I said, when we were all assembled around the primary monitoring station. I played an audio capture, a human male, somewhere in what they called North America, recording a video for his audience on a social platform. His voice was the particular register humans use when they're pretending to be more upset than they are. There's a cadence to it, a rhythm. I'd started to recognize it. He was saying approximately, "I don't care what anybody says. I don't care about your sweet and savory nonsense. I don't care about your it's just a preference argument. If you put pineapple on a pizza, you are wrong, objectively, morally. The pineapple does not belong there. The moisture content alone." Bolt had woken up. He was staring at the speaker relay with his secondary eyes fully dilated, which for his species indicates something between disbelief and existential reconfiguration. "He's talking about moisture content," Bolt said, "in the context of food placement." "He is. As if it matters." "To him," Prendar said slowly, "I think it does." But Bolt gestured at the volume metrics. "There are 40,000 of these. That's 40,000 individual humans who have chosen to spend time. 43,000 now, Siev said from her corner. She'd pulled up a real-time tracker. The cluster's growing. We listened for 3 hours before anyone spoke in a way that wasn't just stunned observation. It was Seswain, the engineer, who broke the silence in a meaningful way. She'd been sitting at the back of the room, listening with her eyes half closed, her species standard deep attention posture, and she hadn't said anything until she suddenly said, "They're not actually arguing about pizza." Everyone looked at her. Seswain doesn't say things unnecessarily. When she speaks, the room pays attention. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The surface content is pizza." She stood up slowly and moved closer to the monitor. "But listen to what's underneath it, what they're actually negotiating." She was quiet for a moment, sorting through the feeds. This one, the male with the loud voice, he's not upset about flavor combinations. He's upset about rules, about what's allowed. He has a very fixed internal sense of what belongs in what category, and the pineapple violates a category boundary. It's not the pineapple, it's the boundary. She pulled up another feed, a human female, quieter, more amused in her tone. This one, she likes it precisely because it breaks the rule. The violation is the point for her. She's arguing for the pineapple, but she's actually arguing for freedom from rigid categories. Prendar was nodding slowly. Her ear fronds were doing the thing where they fold forward, concentration, deep engagement. "And this one," Seswain continued, pulling up a third exchange, "isn't arguing for or against the pineapple at all. He's arguing for the right of individuals to have preferences without judgment. He's used the pizza as a test case for tolerance. He doesn't care about the pizza. He cares about whether other people have to justify their choices." The room was quiet for a moment. "So they're having," I said slowly, "a philosophical debate about categorical thinking, individual autonomy, and the nature of subjective experience." "Using a fruit," Seswain said, "as a test case." "Yes." "Because," Dro said from the medical officer's station, she'd been quiet too, which for a Palladian is unusual, because a fruit is safe. You can be angry about a fruit without being actually, harmfully angry. You can practice the feeling of strong disagreement in a context where nobody gets hurt. I wrote that down. I want to be honest about that. I physically transcribed it, in my own hand, into the observation notebook that I keep alongside the official digital records. The one that isn't part of the formal filing system. The one that contains the things I need to think about rather than just document. They practice disagreement on things that don't matter, so that the disagreement itself stays manageable. I've been turning that observation over in my mind for 11 days now. Chapter 5, The Deeper Channel. We kept the cluster feed active, let it run, started logging patterns. What we found, over the next 6 hours, was that the pineapple argument was not unique. It was, in fact, one instance of a recurring human communication pattern that our automated systems had been logging for years without anyone fully analyzing what they were seeing. The pattern had a consistent structure. First, a low-stakes topic gets introduced into the communication ecosystem. It can be anything: food preferences, the temperature at which beverages should be consumed, whether a specific garment constitutes casual or formal wear, the correct pronunciation of a word, the appropriate timing of a particular social ritual. Second, the community fractures along predictable lines, not random lines, predictable ones. The same fault lines that appear in every high-stakes human disagreement appear here in miniature. Authority versus individual preference. Tradition versus innovation. Rules versus freedom. Aesthetics versus function. Purity versus mixture. Third, both sides generate what humans call arguments. Strings of reasoning, evidence, emotional appeals, humor, historical reference, and personal testimony, all deployed in service of a position on the low-stakes topic. Fourth, the argument peaks, reaches maximum communicative volume. Both sides feel they have made their points comprehensively and completely. Fifth, nothing changes. Neither side converts the other. The argument doesn't resolve, it simply subsides, loses energy. The humans move on. And then, and this is the part that took me longest to understand, the argument is remembered fondly. Not despite its lack of resolution, because of it. I pulled Prendar aside late in the shift, when the others had cycled back to their posts, and we were alone at the primary array. She was the colleague I trusted most with the things that weren't ready to be official observations. "Does this scare you?" I asked. She considered the question seriously, which is why I asked her instead of someone else. Most people, when you ask them something that's really a question about your own state rather than theirs, give you the answer they think you want. Prendar gives you what she actually thinks. "No," she said finally, "should it?" "I don't know, that's why I asked." She was quiet for a while, watching the feed. 43,000 humans still going. The cluster had held its size for 6 hours, which by normal communication pattern standards should have been impossible. Topics don't sustain attention like that. They spike and drop. This one was just continuing, sustaining itself, generating new sub-arguments and tributaries and tangents that fed back into the main stream. "What scares me," Prendar said eventually, "is species that don't do this. Species where disagreement is always serious, always meaningful, always high stakes. Because those species don't practice. They don't learn to hold a strong opinion and then put it down when the moment is over. Every disagreement escalates because they have no muscle for non-escalation." She looked at me. Her ear fronds were level, the Velthian neutral, which is as close to gravity as her species gets. "Humans have a very developed muscle for non-escalation," she said. "They just hide it behind a lot of noise." Chapter 6, The Unexpected Arrival. I need to tell you what happened at 21:17 station time, because it changed the nature of this report entirely. We'd been running the cluster analysis for nearly 7 hours when she'd been monitoring the secondary arrays, the ones dedicated to tracking physical world signals rather than internet communications, suddenly pushed back from her console and said, very quietly, "Something is wrong." "With the array?" I asked. "With the signal environment." She pulled up a spatial frequency map on the display panel. "We have interference. Close proximity source." I was at her side in 3 steps. The map was showing what it shouldn't have been showing, a localized signal disruption in a narrow frequency band, the kind of pattern that doesn't occur naturally. That pattern has a name in cooperative intelligence doctrine. It has a very specific name, and when you see it, there's a procedure that activates automatically. It's called a shadow wake, and it means another ship is nearby, running without full active signature suppression. Not our ship, not a cooperative vessel, something else. "How close?" I asked. My voice was level. "I'm proud of that." 6,000 units and closing, Siev said. "It's been out there for at least," she checked the logs, her fingers moving quickly, "for at least 4 hours. It's been sitting and it's been listening." "Listening to what?" She looked at me. We both looked at the primary feed. The cluster. The 43,000 humans, still arguing about pineapple pizza, completely unaware that at least 2 separate species of extraterrestrial intelligence were listening to them do it. "To them," she said. I activated the security protocol and called Commander Dreshval. The commander appeared on the communication screen looking the way she always looks, slightly irritated and completely in command of herself. She was on the command vessel, 3 light towers out, and the communication delay made conversation awkward, but her response to my report arrived within minutes. The gist of it was, hold position, do not attempt contact, continue monitoring both the human feeds and the unknown vessel, document everything, And she added this at the end, almost as an afterthought, try to figure out what they're after. She didn't need to say, be careful, that was understood. Seswain was already working on the unknown vessel's signal characteristics when I got back to the monitoring room. She had that particular focused quality that engineers get when a problem is interesting enough to override their normal cautious silence. Moraki design, I guessed. Moraki ships have a distinctive shadow-wake signature. No, she didn't look up. I know Moraki work. This is, I don't know this. She paused. Vorathian maybe, but modified, heavily modified. Someone has done something interesting to the suppression array on this ship. Vorathian. I let that settle for a moment. The Vorathians were not cooperative members. They were, at last assessment, neutral, the kind of neutral that can tip either way depending on which way the advantage lies. They were also known to be interested in humanity. There had been intelligence reports over the years suggesting that the Vorathian Observation Bureau maintained its own monitoring operations in this system. We'd never caught direct evidence. Until now. Can we hear what they're collecting? I asked. Seswain looked up at that. Her expression was the engineer's equivalent of impressed at the audacity of a question. You want to monitor the monitors. We want to know what they're interested in, I said. The best way to know what they're interested in is to see what they're collecting. She turned back to her console. Give me an hour, she said. Chapter 7, The Build. She gave me 50 minutes. What she'd built, using the station's auxiliary array in a configuration that I am quite confident violates at least 3 cooperative technical protocols, was a mirror intercept, a way to capture a fragment of the Vorathian vessel's own outbound signal and reverse engineer what incoming data streams they'd been pulling. It was, to be blunt about it, extraordinary technical work. Seswain is extraordinary technical work, and she knows it, which is why she said absolutely nothing and simply pulled up the results on the secondary display and stepped back. We looked at what the Vorathians had been collecting. They'd been collecting the pineapple cluster. Not as a side capture, not as incidental monitoring. Actively, deliberately. They'd filtered their arrays to focus on this specific communication cluster, and based on the signal logs, they'd been on station and listening to it for close to 5 hours before we even noticed they were there. They came here for this, Bolt said. He'd rejoined us at some point and was standing behind my shoulder. They knew this was going to happen. Or they were already monitoring and pivoted when the cluster emerged, Prendar said. She was very still. Her stillness was the kind that means she's working something out. The question is, why does this interest them? What are they seeing in this that? She stopped. What? I asked. What if, she said slowly, they've misidentified it? That was the moment. That's the moment I keep coming back to, 11 days later, in the absence of proper sleep cycles. Explain, I said. We know what this is, Prendar said. We've spent 7 hours analyzing it. We know it's a low-stakes social argument being used as a proxy for philosophical debate. We know the emotional temperature is elevated but not genuine. We know it's a form of entertainment, a way for humans to practice disagreement in a safe context. We know this because we've been listening to humans for 47 years. She looked at the Vorathian signal data on the secondary display. They haven't. The room was very quiet. If you encounter this kind of communication pattern, this volume, this emotional intensity, this level of faction formation and coordinated conflict signaling, without that context, Prendar's ear fronds folded inward, the Velthian expression of controlled alarm. You might think you were looking at something much more serious, an internal species conflict escalating toward civil instability, I said, or the beginning of one. Dro, who had been silent for a long time, said, would the Vorathians act on that assessment? And nobody answered right away, because nobody was sure. And the people in this room are not people who give you false certainty. Potentially, I said. Yes, potentially. What I need you to understand, and this is the part of the report that I have revised 7 times because I want the logic to be airtight, is that the Vorathian Observation Bureau strategic doctrine treats internal instability in developing civilizations as an opportunity. Not an opportunity for conquest, necessarily. The Vorathians are sophisticated enough to know that direct intervention is rarely the optimal strategy, but an opportunity for influence, for positioning, for establishing relationships with whatever faction comes out on top. If the Vorathians believed they were watching humanity fracture along deep ideological lines, if they believed they were watching the early signals of genuine internal conflict, they would begin preparation for contact. Not aggressive contact, subtle contact, the kind that looks like help and functions as leverage. And here's the awful irony that kept me awake that first night and every night since. If the Vorathians made contact with humanity based on a misread of a pizza debate, and if humanity, characteristically, beautifully, bewilderingly human lie, responded to that contact in a way that was unpredictable and loud and emotionally elevated, as they tend to respond to most things, the Vorathians might interpret that response as further evidence of instability. And then you have an escalation built entirely on a misunderstanding, built on 43,000 humans arguing about whether fruit belongs on bread. Chapter 8, the climax. At 23:40 station time, the Vorathian vessel began repositioning, moving closer to Earth. Seswain flagged it first. The Shadowwake signature was shifting, the pattern of it changing in the way that indicates a vessel altering course rather than simply holding station. They weren't approaching at speed. This wasn't an attack vector. It was slow, deliberate, the movement of a ship that is doing reconnaissance, not assault. But they were closer than they'd been, and getting closer still. Options, I said. I was trying to think clearly. I need to tell you that my heart, well, whatever the 4th-tier intelligence core equivalent of a heart is, was doing something complicated at that point. Because I was watching 2 things simultaneously. The Vorathian vessel closing on an inhabited system and the primary monitoring feed where the pineapple cluster was still active. Still going. 51,000 separate human communication events now. All of them cheerfully, enthusiastically, completely unseriously arguing about a pizza topping, completely unaware that they were about to trigger an interstellar incident. "We can signal the commander," Prendar said. 3-hour communication delay. By the time she responds, whatever is going to happen will have happened. "We can illuminate the station," Bolt said, meaning drop our own suppression field, make ourselves visible. Let the Vorathians know they've been observed. It's a cooperative protocol, a way of saying we see you without saying anything else. "That might accelerate their timeline," I said. "If they know we're watching, and they're committed to their assessment, illuminating just tells them they need to move faster." "Then we need to give them better data," Seswain said. She said it simply, as if it were obvious. And perhaps it was obvious, and I'd been so focused on the problem from a security angle that I'd missed the straightforward solution sitting right in front of me. "Explain," I said. "They've misread the signal. They think they're seeing conflict. We know what they're actually seeing. So," she looked at me with the patient expression of an engineer watching someone catch up to a conclusion. "We give them the context. We'd be revealing our monitoring operation. We'd be preventing an interstellar incident triggered by a pizza debate," Siev said from her corner, and her tone was the tone of someone who has been quiet for a long time and has now decided to speak. "I need to tell you about what happened next, because it's the part of this report that I was most uncertain about including. It represents a series of decisions that I made without authorization, using methods that are, in the most technical sense, outside the scope of my operational mandate. I'm including it because It's what actually happened. And because I think it matters, we composed a data package. Seswain built the transmission architecture. Prendar and I assembled the content. What we sent to the Vorathian vessel was, essentially, 47 years of human context, compressed into the most efficient format we could manage. Communication pattern analysis, behavioral documentation, cultural context notes, the specific framework for understanding human low-stakes proxy arguments. And right at the top, because I felt it needed to be the first thing they saw, 11 hours of annotated observation from the pineapple cluster. We transmitted it on a frequency the Vorathian suppression array would have been designed to catch. A cooperative intelligence signal, something that would tell them, immediately and unmistakably, who it was from and what kind of information they were receiving. Then we waited. The response came 40 minutes later. Not a communication. The Vorathians didn't open a channel. What they sent back was a single frequency acknowledgement pulse. The code that the Vorathian Observation Bureau uses in diplomatic contexts to signal received and understood. And then the Shadowwake signature shifted again. Away from Earth. The vessel was withdrawing. Slowly, the way it had approached, deliberately, without drama. The repositioning that had been bringing them closer to the human system was reversing itself. By the time I looked at the tracking display, they were already 300 units further out than they'd been at their closest approach. And still going. The pineapple cluster, which had been running for 11 hours, reached its peak at approximately the same time 01:15 station time and then began its natural decline. Not because the argument had been resolved. It hadn't. It never would be. But because human attention, even on matters of passionate opinion, has a rhythm to it, an arc. The cluster peaked and then it subsided the way weather subsides, not gone, sleeping. I looked at the final count on the cluster analysis. 67,000 human communication events, 67,000 people debating a fruit. And because of those 67,000 people, because of their noise and their cheerful unreasonableness and their completely serious treatment of a completely unserious question, we'd caught a Vorathian monitoring operation, made contact with a vessel that the cooperative had been trying to locate for 3 years, and potentially prevented an interstellar intervention built on a catastrophic misread. I sat back in my chair. Bolt was looking at the primary display. The cluster graph, showing the beautiful spike and gentle decline of 67,000 humans at maximum argumentative engagement. They have no idea, he said. No, I said, they don't. They argued about pizza and accidentally saved themselves, Prendar said. She said it quietly, but she said it clearly. Without meaning to, without knowing. They were just being what they are, and it was enough. Chapter 9, The Resolution. I filed the incident report in 2 parts. The official portion went through normal channels, the Vorathian vessel location, the transmission we'd sent, the response, the withdrawal. It was marked priority classification and it went up the chain quickly. Commander Dreshval's response, when it came through after the communication delay, was characteristically brief. Good work. Full documentation required. We will discuss your use of unauthorized transmission protocols at your earliest convenience. I have that meeting next week. I'm not particularly worried about it. The other portion of the report, the portion you're reading now, went into the behavioral archive, the research division, the long, slow accumulation of observations about humanity that has been building in this station's databases for 47 years, one layer of astonishment at a time. In the days since the incident, I've been thinking about what Seswain said, the idea of giving the Vorathians context, showing them what they were actually seeing rather than what the surface data implied. I've been thinking about how often, across my 19 years in galactic intelligence, context has been the missing variable. How many conflicts I've watched develop not because of genuine incompatibility, but because of misread signal. Because one party looked at the data without the framework to interpret it correctly. Humanity produces more data, per capita per unit time, than any species we monitor. More communication, more signal, more noise. The sheer volume of what they generate is staggering. We've been collecting it for 47 years, and we've processed maybe a fraction of what they've put out there, even with the array running continuously. And so much of it looks from outside like conflict, like fracture, like a species in permanent internal crisis, arguing with itself at maximum volume about everything simultaneously. It's easy to mistake the noise for chaos. It's easy to look at 67,000 humans screaming about a pizza topping and think, these creatures cannot agree on anything. They are ungovernable, they are unstable. You'd be wrong, but the mistake would be understandable. What you'd be missing, what takes time and attention and a willingness to sit with the confusion until the pattern resolves, is the thing underneath the noise. The thing that Seswain heard first. The thing that Prendar articulated most clearly. The thing that Dro, the Palladian medical officer, sits within the clinical part of her mind, trying to understand what it means for a species' psychological health. Humans argue about pineapple pizza because they need to argue about something. Because disagreement is a skill, and skills require practice, and the safest place to practice is on something where the stakes are zero. Because they live in a world of genuine disagreement, real, hard, consequential disagreement about real, hard, consequential things. And they have figured out, without anyone telling them to, without it being written in any policy document, that the way to keep that real disagreement from destroying them is to keep the muscle limber on things that don't matter. They practice arguing, so that when it counts, when the argument is about something real, something painful, something with actual weight, they already know how to do it, already know how to hold a strong position and hear the other side, already know how to be wrong without being destroyed, already know how to put the argument down when it's over. I don't know if they know they do this. I suspect most of them don't. I suspect it's not a strategy, exactly, not a deliberate choice, more like something that evolved, like the way their immune systems learned to train on small threats so they'd be ready for large ones. Their arguments about nothing are an immune system for their arguments about everything. Ending Part 1. I wrote that last section at 03:00 station time, in the quiet after the cluster had subsided and the Vorathian vessel had withdrawn and the others had finally, at my insistence, gone to rest. I was alone at the primary array. The monitoring feeds were running on their normal automated cycle, the way they always do, human signals pouring through the array. The usual astonishing volume of it, billions of people, living their lives, communicating with each other, arguing and laughing and worrying and singing and explaining things to each other, and asking questions and telling stories, and doing the 1,000 other things that fill up a human day. I found myself doing something I don't usually do during monitoring shifts. I just listened. Not analyzing, not documenting, not flagging for the archive, just listening to the sound of them, the collective sound of a species alive and complicated and loud and completely, beautifully unaware of how extraordinary they are. And I thought about the 67,000 of them, sleeping now or moving on to whatever came next, none of them knowing that their argument about a fruit had been heard by at least 3 separate forms of intelligence above their atmosphere. None of them knowing that their argument had mattered, had actually, consequentially mattered, in a way that had nothing to do with pineapple. I thought about what Prendar said. They were just being what they are, and it was enough. I saved the observation to the archive. And then I opened a new file and started writing Part 2. End of Part 1. Continue to Part 2, the question we couldn't answer. Commander Dreshval arrived at the station in person. That should tell you something about how seriously the cooperative was taking this. Dreshval doesn't travel to field stations. Field stations report to Dreshval. The natural order of things moves information toward her. She doesn't move toward information. The fact that she was standing in our gray corridor, wearing the expression of someone who has been traveling for an uncomfortable amount of time, and is not pleased about it but is too disciplined to complain, told me before she opened her mouth that the incident report had generated more attention than I'd expected. "Vethkalos," she said. "Commander, you sent an unauthorized intelligence transmission to a Vorathian vessel." "Yes. Using a configuration of the auxiliary array that I am told technically," she paused, in the way she pauses when she's reading from the report in her memory, "does not exist, because engineering signed off on its decommissioning 3 years ago." "Seswain is very creative," I said. "That's one word for it." She looked at me. Her species is hard to read. They have mobile facial structures that don't map cleanly onto the emotional expressions I'm most familiar with, but I've worked under her long enough to know that the particular configuration she was currently making with her face was not anger. It was something more complicated than anger. "Walk me through it," she said. "All of it from the beginning." So I did. I walked her through the cluster detection, the 11 hours of monitoring, Seswain's analysis, Prendar's interpretation of the proxy argument framework, the shadow wake detection, the Vorathian vessel, the transmission, the withdrawal. I walked her through all of it, and she asked questions at intervals, sharp, precise questions that told me she'd already read the official portion of the incident report 3 times and was now checking whether the verbal account matched. It did, because I'd written the report carefully, and because the account I told was what had actually happened. These things have a way of aligning when you do the first one honestly. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The pineapple thing," she said eventually. "Yes. This whole incident was triggered by humans arguing about whether pineapple is an acceptable pizza topping, yes." She was quiet for another moment. "Is it?" she asked. I looked at her. "I genuinely cannot tell you," I said. 11 days of listening and I'm no closer to a consensus. The cluster closed without resolution. Both positions remain valid within their own internal logic. I think it may be genuinely unresolvable. "Like most things that actually matter," Dreshval said. And she walked past me into the monitoring room, and the meeting, the one I'd been dreading, was apparently over. What I had not expected was that she would sit down at the primary monitoring console and ask Prendar to walk her through the cluster replay. Not a summary, not the analysis report, the actual replay, the audio and text captures from the cluster itself, the raw voice of 67,000 humans arguing about a fruit in 11 time-compressed hours. She listened for 2 hours. The team stayed quiet, gave her space. This was not the kind of listening you interrupt. I watched her face while she listened. The mobile structure of it doing small, involuntary things at intervals, the cooperative equivalent of micro-expressions, the movements that happen below the level of conscious control. Something that might have been surprise, something that might have been amusement. Once toward the end of the 2nd hour, something that I couldn't name. When she finally leaned back from the console, she didn't speak immediately. She looked at the display, the cluster graph, the beautiful spike and slow decline of 67,000 voices. "How long have we been monitoring this species?" she asked. 47 years, I said, under this station. "And before, the preliminary observation period?" 11 years, passive intercept only. 58 years total. She was still looking at the graph. And in 58 years of monitoring, the most significant intelligence event we've generated in this system happened because of a pizza debate. "Technically," Prendar said, "the event happened because of how we responded to the pizza debate. The Vorathians were already there. We just happened to catch them because the cluster was loud enough to." I know how it happened, Dreshval said, but she said it without edge, almost thoughtfully. I'm not being critical, she paused. I'm trying to understand what I'm looking at. Can I ask you something? She said, and she was asking the room rather than any individual. It was the way she asks things when she's genuinely uncertain and wants the benefit of collective thinking. Of course, I said. In 58 years of monitoring this species, she gestured at the primary display. The current feeds running, the automated cycle, the continuous river of human communication. What have we learned? Nobody spoke immediately. The question was too large for a quick answer, and we all knew it. It was Dro, the medical officer, who answered first. She does that sometimes, gets there ahead of the rest of us, because her training involves a different kind of pattern recognition. Medical thinking, systems thinking. What do the symptoms indicate about the underlying condition? We've learned, Dro said, that they're more resilient than they look. Explain. Every time we've run a threat assessment on this species, the threat matrix has flagged them as high risk for self-termination. The modeling consistently shows a civilization on a knife's edge, the weapons technology, the environmental damage, the social fractures. By every standard metric, this species should have collapsed several times by now. She paused. They haven't. Because. Dro was quiet for a moment, choosing her words with the careful precision she always uses when she's saying something she isn't entirely sure about. Because the metrics don't capture the part that matters. The metrics see the fractures. They don't see she searched for the word. The elasticity. The way they absorb crisis and keep moving. The way they're never actually as far gone as they look from outside. The pineapple argument, Bolt said. He said it like a realization arriving, not like a contribution to a conversation. It's the same thing. From outside it looks like fracture. From inside it's elastic. Exactly, Dro said. Dreshval was looking at the current feeds now. The automated cycle, pulling its continuous sample from the human internet. Even at this hour, and it was late in the cycle, the station was quieter than it gets. The feed was full. Never truly silent. What do they argue about today? She asked. Siev pulled up the current cluster analysis, scrolled through it quickly. The correct temperature to serve water, she said after a moment. There's a significant cluster in what they call the southern United States about ice water specifically, and she scrolled further. There's a recurring debate about whether a particular piece of their media, she looked up. Whether a particular film from 30 years ago should have had a different ending. A film from 30 years ago, Dreshval said. They revisit these things, Prendar said. The arguments don't fully close. They go dormant and then something triggers them again, and she made a gesture that means, in Velthian body language, and so it continues. They're still arguing about a film from 30 years ago, Dreshval said. And they'll still be arguing about it 30 years from now, I said. With, if anything, more intensity. Because by then it will have acquired the additional weight of nostalgia, which in human emotional architecture adds approximately 40% more argumentative energy to any position. Dreshval looked at me. You've been here too long, she said. Possibly, I said, yes. Chapter 3. The VORRATHAN response. On the third day of Dreshval's visit, the Vorathians made contact. Not the vessel had continued its withdrawal and was, by our tracking data, no longer in the system. The contact came from the Vorathian Observation Bureau itself, routed through cooperative diplomatic channels, a formal communication addressed to Commander Dreshval and specifically by name, to Senior Observer Veth Kalos. The communication was encrypted in standard diplomatic format. We decoded it in the monitoring room with everyone present because Dreshval, unusually, didn't ask anyone to leave. The communication was from someone identified as Senior Intelligence Analyst Bear Novak, Vorathian Observation Bureau, Human Assessment Division. We acknowledge receipt of your intelligence package regarding the human communication cluster of date redacted. The contextual data was instructive. We had, as you inferred, misidentified the nature of the event. We are curious about the methodology you employed to detect our presence. Your array configuration is, technically speaking, not supposed to exist. We are filing this observation as a compliment. We wish to discuss the human assessment question in a more formal context. We believe there are aspects of human behavioral patterns that require broader analysis than any single monitoring operation can provide. We propose a joint research framework. Additionally, we have reviewed the communication cluster data you provided in full. We have a question that we cannot resolve internally. Is pineapple an acceptable pizza topping? We find the question has become difficult to set aside. Any perspective would be welcome. The room was absolutely silent for a moment. And then Prendar started laughing. She doesn't laugh often. Velthians have a complicated relationship with the expression, but when she does, it's full and genuine and startling, and it knocks something loose in the room. Bolt started next, then Siev, then quietly Dro. Seswain made the Moraki expression that functions as laughter, a rhythmic shoulder vibration, and looked at the floor. Dreshval's face did the mobile thing that I still couldn't name. I suspected it might be laughter. I chose not to confirm this observation in the official report. The response we drafted to the Vorathian Bureau took 3 hours and went through 7 revisions. The formal portions, the proposal for a joint research framework, the technical notes about the array configuration, the intelligence sharing protocols, were Dreshval's domain, and she handled them with the efficiency I expected from her. The last section of the response was mine. Regarding your question about pineapple as a pizza topping, we have monitored 67,000 human communications on this specific topic. We can confirm that the question is genuinely unresolved within human discourse, and that this is not a failure of analysis, but an accurate reflection of the state of the debate. Both positions have internal logical validity. Both positions have significant and vocal constituencies. Neither position has achieved decisive communicative dominance in 58 years of monitoring. Our assessment, this question may be permanently unresolvable. The humans appear to have made peace with this. They continue arguing regardless. We suggest you do the same. Join the argument, it helps. Chapter 4, the question we couldn't answer. The joint research framework meeting was scheduled for a date approximately 2 months out, at a neutral station that both the Cooperative and the Vorathian Bureau had access to. The agenda covered human behavioral assessment methodology, long-term monitoring protocols, and the establishment of a shared data archive. Dreshval left the day after the communication was sent. Before she boarded the transport, she stopped at the entrance to the monitoring room and looked at the primary array, the console, the feeds, the cluster analysis displays, the accumulated 11 years of my tenure at this station visible in the equipment's wear and the calibration notes taped to the side panels. Vethkalos, she said. Commander. The unauthorized transmission. Yes. On review, she paused. On review, it was the correct call. The documentation will reflect that. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm still going to need you to explain, in writing, why the auxiliary array configuration exists, why Seswain didn't decommission it, and what exactly the 3-year discrepancy in the equipment logs is about. Seswain will be happy to write that report, I said. Good, she can also fix the configuration so it doesn't show up on the next inspection sweep. She turned to go, then stopped. One more thing. Commander. The humans, 58 years of monitoring, the pineapple cluster. The Vorathian incident. She was looking at the corridor wall rather than at me, which meant she was choosing her words carefully. Do you have a conclusion about them? I thought about it. No, I said. She nodded. Good, she said. Be suspicious of any analysis of this species that reaches a clean conclusion. They don't support clean conclusions. She paused one more time. That's either their greatest weakness or their greatest strength. I've been unable to determine which. And she walked down the corridor to the transport bay. Chapter 5. What the Monitors Learn. After she left, I sat at the primary array for a long time. It was a Thursday by the human calendar. Humans have mixed feelings about Thursdays. It's close enough to Friday to generate some anticipatory relief, but not close enough to fully commit. Humans in certain employment contexts spend Thursdays in a state of productive ambivalence, which generates a particular quality of communication that I've come to find oddly comfortable. The feeds were running their normal cycle. I'd stopped noticing, years ago, when the array was working and when it wasn't. It's so continuous that silence would be the anomaly, not sound. The sound of it is just the sound of the station now. The sound of them. Billions of voices, all talking at once, all talking to each other across the distances their world has made intimate in a way that their ancestors couldn't have imagined. I thought about the pineapple cluster, thought about the Vorathians sitting in their ship in the dark above a world they were watching and getting wrong, getting almost dangerously wrong because they were looking at the signal without the context. I thought about Seswain saying simply, give them the context, as if it were obvious, as if the solution to misunderstanding were just more information, more care, more willingness to explain rather than assume. I thought about whether that's true, whether more context always helps, whether there are things about humanity that no amount of context can make comprehensible, not because they're incomprehensible, but because they're the kind of thing that has to be experienced rather than explained. Whether you have to live in it, in the noise, in the cheerful, relentless, affectionate noise of it, to really understand what you're hearing. I pulled up the original cluster one more time. The replay, all 11 hours of it compressed into something I could scroll through, the graph line rising, the beautiful, ridiculous spike, 67,000 people. I found a capture near the peak of the cluster that I hadn't focused on before. A human female, young by voice, probably in what they called her 20s, recording a video for her online audience. She was in what appeared to be a kitchen. There were sounds in the background, the small domestic sounds of a human home, something heating, a distant voice that might have been a family member in another room. She was talking about pineapple pizza. But she was laughing while she talked, not the performed laugh of someone doing comedy, just the laugh of someone who finds the whole situation genuinely, helplessly funny. She kept starting a sentence about why she liked it, and then losing the thread because the laughter was interrupting her. Okay, she said, finally gasping slightly. Here's my argument, here's my full argument for pineapple pizza. Ready? She composed herself. It tastes good, she said. That's it. That's the whole argument. It tastes good to me. That's why I eat it. And then she dissolved into laughter again, at the absurdity of it, at the fact that this was apparently something that needed to be argued at all, at the beautiful stupidity of the conversation she was in. I love this, she managed to say eventually. I love that this is something we're all mad about. I love that we're all here. What are we doing? I've listened to that capture 17 times. I've been trying to figure out why it stays with me, why that particular moment, out of 67,000, keeps pulling me back. I think it's because it contains, in a minute and a half of a young woman laughing in her kitchen, the thing that makes humanity the most difficult subject I have ever been assigned to monitor. She knows that's the thing. She knows it's absurd. She knows the argument is unserious. She knows that the strength of feeling on both sides is wildly disproportionate to the actual stakes. She knows all of that, and she's in it anyway, and she loves it, loves the absurdity of it, loves the fact that she's there with 67,000 strangers all being ridiculous together. She's not arguing despite knowing it's absurd. She's arguing because it's absurd. Because somewhere in that absurdity is something real, a connection, a belonging, a momentary membership in a community of people who all care about the same ridiculous thing at the same ridiculous time. That's what the Vorathians were missing. That's what the threat assessment matrix misses. That's what clean, cold analysis of human communication patterns keeps failing to capture. The argument is the point. The connection is the argument. 67,000 people, alone in their rooms or at their desks or in their kitchens, finding each other across the distance in the most human way imaginable by disagreeing, loudly, about nothing, together. Chapter 6, The Shift That Never Ends. I keep coming back to the question Dreshval asked. Do you have a conclusion about them? And I keep coming back to my answer. No. Because here is the problem with trying to reach a conclusion about humanity. The moment you think you have them categorized, they produce a new data point that demolishes the category. I have 47 years of station records, and I can show you in that archive at least a dozen points where our formal risk assessment was prepared to move humans into a higher threat tier, based on their weapons programs, their environmental behavior, their apparent inability to resolve the internal conflicts that keep fracturing their societies. And in every case, without exception, something happened that we hadn't modeled. Some unexpected expression of cooperation. Some spontaneous large-scale act of support that had no strategic logic behind it, that cost the participants more than it gained them, that emerged from no central organization and followed no command structure and happened because enough humans individually decided they wanted it to happen. The species that in our models should have destroyed itself several times by now keeps finding ways not to. Not because they're strategically brilliant, not because they're organized or disciplined or following a coherent long-term plan, but because they're stubborn, not in the way that makes a species brittle and dangerous, but in the way that makes them elastic. They bend. They break a little. They put themselves back together slightly differently than they were before. They keep going. Prendar stopped by my console late in the shift. She does this, brings me something warm to drink in a container that the station manifest officially lists as a calibration fluid vessel, which is how we've been getting around the mess hall's nutritional integration paste for approximately 3 years. She sets the container down and doesn't comment on it, and I accept it and don't comment on it, and we have never discussed this arrangement because that would make it less comfortable. She sat on the edge of the secondary console and watched the feeds for a while. The joint meeting, she said eventually, the Vorathians. In 2 months. You'll go. Dreshval wants me there, I'll go. And you'll tell them, she gestured at the feeds. What? How do you explain this to them in a way that actually lands? I thought about it. I'll play them the capture, I said, the young woman in the kitchen. The one who's laughing. Yes. Prendar nodded slowly. Her ear fronds did the fold-forward thing, concentration, working something out. You think that'll be enough? No, I said, but I think it'll be a start. Chapter 7. What the FEDS say tonight. It's late now. By station time, it's very late. By human time on the part of the planet I'm currently monitoring most closely, it's somewhere in the early morning hours. The feeds are quieter, not silent, never silent, but lower in volume. The clusters that dominate daylight and evening hours have subsided. What remains is the background signal, the messages people send when they can't sleep, the night voices. I find them the most honest, the night voices. There's a specific quality to human communication in the small hours. The audience is smaller, not many people awake to respond, not much expectation of immediate engagement. People write differently, speak differently when they're not performing for a crowd, when they're just reaching out because they want to, because the quiet got too large, because something occurred to them and they needed to say it somewhere. I have a sample playing now. A man, somewhere, I'm not tracking location closely tonight, writing a message to what appears to be a community of people with a shared interest. The community is devoted, from what I can track, to competitive cooking competitions, a television format. Humans have built entire digital communities around watching each other cook on television and discussing it with great intensity, which is a phenomenon I have spent considerable time documenting and considerably less time understanding. The message he's writing is about a meal he made tonight. He describes it in detail, the ingredients, the process, the small thing that went wrong that he had to fix midway through, the moment when he tasted it and knew it had worked. He's writing it at 2 in the morning to a community of strangers who will read it when they wake up, because he made something and it pleased him and he wanted to tell someone. The last line of his message is, "Anyway, it turned out good, thought you all would appreciate it." I archived that one. Not for the behavioral analysis reports, not for the official documentation, for the notebook, the one that isn't part of the formal filing system. Because there is something in that message, in the simplicity of it turned out good, thought you all would appreciate it, that I want to keep. That I don't want to process into data and conclusion and risk assessment and threat tier classification. There's a man awake at 2 in the morning who made something with his hands, and it turned out well, and he wanted other people to know about it. He sent the message into a dark, quiet internet and went asleep, probably, trusting that the community would be there when they woke up. That's not a threat assessment. That's not a data point in a behavioral cluster. That's a person. 67,000 of them argued about pineapple pizza. One of them, alone and awake at 2 in the morning, told strangers about a meal he was proud of. Both things are true at the same time. That's the thing about humanity that I keep trying to write into the reports and keep finding that the reports can't hold. The largeness of them. Not in scale, though they are large in scale, but in the range. The distance between the worst of them and the best of them, and the way both ends of that range exist simultaneously inside the same species, sometimes inside the same person, sometimes inside the same hour. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to file it. I just know I can't stop listening. This report will be filed, cataloged, and archived in the Galactic Intelligence Cooperative's Human Assessment Division. It will join 47 years of previous reports, thousands of documents, millions of data points, an accumulated record of a species that has spent half a century generating more material than we can fully analyze. Future observers will read this report as part of their orientation. Husk-Torval's final line is still quoted. Perhaps something from this document will be quoted too, though I don't know what. Perhaps they practice arguing about nothing so they can survive arguing about everything. That one feels right. It captures something real. Or perhaps the argument is the connection. That one is shorter, more portable. The kind of thing that fits on a calibration fluid vessel, if you were inclined to write things on calibration fluid vessels. Or perhaps just, they kept going. The pineapple question remains unresolved. I should note, for the record, that over the course of this 11-day period, I have done something that is not strictly within the parameters of my observational mandate. I have, using the translation and cultural context tools available on this station, located and reviewed several human discussions of the pineapple pizza question that were less argumentative in tone and more analytical humans who had approached the question with some of the systematic rigor that I bring to behavioral observation. I have read their arguments carefully. I find myself, after extensive consideration, unable to reach a firm conclusion. The sweet-savory contrast argument has merit. The textural objection has merit. The categorical integrity position has internal logic. The individual autonomy counterargument is compelling. I have been monitoring humanity for 19 years, and I cannot answer the question they've been arguing about for decades. I find this, unexpectedly, to be a relief. Because if I could answer it, if there were a clean, correct, final answer, then it would stop being worth arguing about. And if it stopped being worth arguing about, 67,000 humans wouldn't have filled a Tuesday night with noise and laughter and passionate opinion about a fruit. And if they hadn't done that, a Vorathian vessel would have gotten close enough to a human world to cause an incident that none of us would have enjoyed resolving. The unresolvable argument protected them, the one they've been having for generations, the one they'll keep having indefinitely, with the energy of people who genuinely love the fight. That argument, that beautiful, pointless, essential argument, bought them one more quiet night. I hope they have many more. I'll be here, listening either way.